There is a kind of tiredness that doesn't show. It lives beneath polite smiles and timely replies. It wears the face of the ever-present friend, the always understanding partner, the one who never lets the silence stretch too long, who answers the message at midnight, who says yes when everything inside begs for no. This kind of tiredness doesn't scream, it whispers. And the whisper says, I am disappearing. We grow up learning that love must be earned through usefulness, that to be needed is to be valuable. So we rush to fill silence, to fix things, to be the first to reply. We become dependable, predictable, available, and eventually exhausted. But somewhere in that exhaustion, something begins to stir, a quiet internal revolt. Not loud, not dramatic, just the realization that your peace costs too much to be handed away so easily. What if your constant presence wasn't a strength, but a slow erosion of self? What if your automatic yes was a betrayal? Carl Jung spoke of individuation, the journey toward becoming your whole self. Not the self shaped by expectations, but the self beneath the layers. This path often begins with discomfort, with pulling back, with letting people misunderstand you, with being missed, or maybe not missed at all. True withdrawal is not escape. It is recognition of limits, of truth, of the fact that your energy is not infinite, and those who believe it is have never truly seen you. So you stop replying immediately. You take longer walks. You don't explain yourself. You begin to treat your presence as a gift, not an obligation. And the world reacts. Because those who depended on your availability will feel it first. They will question, accuse, guilt. But beneath that noise is the beginning of something clean and quiet. You choosing you. You were not born to be a mirror for others' needs. You were not meant to live your life in reaction mode. The moment you stop being constantly available is the moment you become powerful. Because you are no longer being used, you are being. And that changes everything. But change never comes without discomfort. The silence you offer will not only unsettle others, it will confront you. It will echo with all the questions you've tried to avoid. Who are you when you are no longer useful? Who are you without the noise of obligation, without the applause of approval? In the stillness, your real voice begins to surface. At first, it is unsure, tentative. You may find yourself reaching for old patterns, tempted to fill the quiet just to feel anchored. But if you wait long enough, something steadier emerges. A knowing, a presence. Not loud, not boastful, just whole. It is in this slow return to self that you begin to rebuild, and the foundation is not performance or perfection. It is permission. Permission to rest. Permission to not know. Permission to exist without justification. There is a sacred kind of power that comes from unlearning urgency, from realizing that the world will not end if you stop showing up for everyone, from understanding that your worth is not something that can be proven through effort, only remembered through being. To choose yourself is not to abandon others, it is to refuse to abandon yourself. There will be days when your silence feels like a failure, when the absence of noise feels like abandonment. Old beliefs will surface, asking if you are selfish, cold, or distant. But growth often masquerades as isolation. And sometimes the greatest act of love is to pause. You will notice how certain people begin to pull away, not because you have hurt them, but because your availability was the glue. And now, without your constant yes, without your quick reply, they must meet themselves where you once stood. Let them. This is not cruelty. This is clarity. Not punishment, but preservation. When you stop managing everyone else's emotions, you finally begin to care for your own, and the quiet grows kinder. It becomes a space you return to rather than run from. A place that knows your real name. Peace is not the absence of noise. It is the end of performing. It is the relief of no longer having to be who others expect. And when you enter that stillness, not as a fugitive, but as a rightful inhabitant, something changes. You begin to remember not everything, just enough. Enough to stop apologizing for needing space. Enough to walk away without explaining. Enough to sit, to breathe, and to be. Then comes a different kind of silence. One not filled with loneliness, but with truth. A silence that is neither empty nor loud, but weighted with knowing. The knowing that you are finally no longer living in fragments. You begin to see your old self more clearly, not with judgment, but with compassion. The one who overgave, the one who over-explained, the one who mistook usefulness for love. You see them, and instead of shame, you feel gratitude. Because even in your overextension, there was sincerity. There was a heart trying to belong. But now you belong to yourself, not in a way that is defensive or closed off, but in a way that is rooted, grounded, whole. The invitations will still come, the old demands, the familiar pulls, but you will answer them differently, not out of fear, not out of guilt, not out of habit, but from a place of clarity that whispers, "Not this time. This is what it means to be free, not to reject connection, but to no longer betray yourself for the sake of it." And in this freedom, you will start to attract differently. People who honor the space you guard, people who do not fear your boundaries, people who see your silence not as distance, but as depth. The more you protect your peace, the more your life begins to shape around it. Not everyone will follow, and that is okay, because the ones who remain will not need you to be constantly available. They will simply need you to be real. And then something strange happens. You begin to feel joy again, but it comes quietly. Not the joy of pleasing others, not the adrenaline of being needed, but the calm kind, the kind that visits in the middle of a slow morning or settles into your shoulders as you breathe in the absence of demand. You start to notice how much you were missing when you were busy holding everything together. The sky unhurried, the warmth of your own thoughts. The way solitude, once mistaken for punishment, now feels like permission. This is the unexpected gift of choosing yourself. Not just peace, not just strength, but the return of small, sacred joys. The kind that cannot be demanded or scheduled. The kind that show up only when you are no longer performing. When you stop being constantly available, you make space. And into that space comes what is real, what is yours, what was waiting. No one tells you how beautiful life becomes when you stop trying to be understood and begin to understand yourself. When you stop seeking to prove and instead allow yourself to simply be. You become less reactive, less rushed, less consumed by the noise, and more present to the quiet rhythm of your own being. The gentle wisdom that says, you are enough even in stillness. And that, perhaps, is the most powerful truth of all. What happens next is subtle, almost invisible to the outside world. But you will feel it, the return of presence. Not the kind you give away in pieces, scattered across everyone else's urgency, but the kind that stays with you, that anchors. You will walk into familiar spaces and no longer shrink. You will answer messages without guilt. You will say no without rehearsing 1,000 justifications, and little by little you will notice how your body no longer braces for impact every time someone needs something from you. This is not detachment. This is embodiment. This is what it looks like to live from the inside out, no longer reacting to every tug, every cry, every expectation, but moving from a place of wholeness. You will still care deeply, but the care will be different. It will not be performative. It will not be desperate. It will not be about proving your worth. It will be chosen, directed, sacred. And for the first time, you will know the difference between being needed and being loved. There is a moment after the retreat when everything becomes eerily quiet, not only outside, but inside. The rush of urgency fades. The chorus of constant requests goes silent. And what you are left with is a space you haven't met in a long time, your own. At first, it feels like loss. You scan for notifications that no longer come. You notice the sudden stillness in your inbox, the empty spaces in your day. You feel, without really knowing why, that maybe you are being punished, as if usefulness was your only ticket to love, and now you have been quietly disinvited. This is the cost of rewriting your value. For so long, your worth was tangled with your availability. You showed up before anyone asked. You anticipated needs before they were voiced. You bent, stretched, and softened so others could remain comfortable. And now, in choosing not to do that, you are confronted with an emptiness that feels unfamiliar. This emptiness is not a void. It is not the absence of something wrong. It is the presence of something waiting to be filled differently. You are not less because you are no longer convenient. You are not fading because you chose stillness. You are simply stepping out of a role that was never meant to define you in the first place. The discomfort you feel now is the grief of expectations unraveling. It is the ache of letting go of being needed as a form of identity. And it is the beginning of becoming someone who does not need to be needed in order to feel whole. Others will not understand this transition. Some will take your absence personally. Some will accuse you of changing. Some will punish your boundaries with silence of their own. Let them. You are not responsible for how others interpret your healing. Your job is not to manage their discomfort. Your job is to stay grounded in the truth that your value has never depended on your ability to constantly give. What begins to grow in this space is subtle but powerful. Self-respect, clarity, discernment. You no longer jump at every request. You no longer feel guilt for saying no. You learn the difference between being kind and being compliant, between connection and codependence. And this changes your relationships. Some will fade, not because of malice, but because the dynamic that once held them is no longer alive. Others will deepen, not through more effort, but through more honesty. You will begin to attract what meets you, not what drains you. The people who remain will not be those who needed you most, but those who respected you best. Your silence becomes sacred. Your boundaries become acts of self-trust. You stop explaining yourself, not out of arrogance, but out of wisdom. You realize that not every question deserves an answer. Not every invitation needs a reply. Not every conflict requires your participation. This is how you reclaim your energy, not by hiding, not by avoiding, but by choosing. Choosing peace over performance. Choosing rest over rushing, choosing depth over noise. And in doing so, you begin to live not for validation, but from alignment. You learn to listen to yourself again, to trust the subtle knowing that says, this is too much, this is not for me, this does not nourish me. And for the first time, you honor that voice without needing to justify it. What a profound shift it is to no longer argue with your intuition, to no longer second-guess your limits, to simply say no and mean it, to say yes and mean that too. This is the quiet revolution of the soul, the steady return to your own center. And once you taste this sovereignty, you will never again trade it for approval. The loneliness of no longer being the helper is real. You may grieve not only lost relationships, but the image you worked so hard to maintain. The person who always knew what to say, who always picked up the phone, who always had space. But you are not abandoning your kindness, you are refining it. You are redirecting it first toward yourself, so that what you offer others is not drawn from depletion, but from depth. This grief is sacred. It is the cost of coming home to yourself, and it opens the door to something greater, the right to choose your emotional investments, the right to walk away from connections that do not honor your growth, the right to be your own source of peace. Now, instead of reacting, you respond. Instead of pleasing, you pause. Instead of absorbing the chaos, you observe it from a distance. You begin to practice emotional conservation. You no longer spend your energy on what will not return it. You stop trying to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding you. You become precise, still kind, still compassionate, but no longer performative. The world may call this selfish. Let it. Only you will know the truth. That your stillness is not a wall, but a window. That your silence is not a punishment, but a prayer. That your boundary is not rejection, but an act of remembering. You are not who you used to be. And that is the point. You have returned to yourself. And in doing so, you have become someone who can no longer be used, only met, only respected, only loved the way you were meant to be. There comes a time when you no longer need to raise your voice to be heard. You no longer need to explain to be understood. You no longer need to argue to protect your worth. You simply become quiet, not out of defeat, but out of depth. This is not the silence of suppression. It is the silence of arrival, of having finally come home to yourself, of knowing that not every emotion demands expression, and not every situation requires participation. At first, your silence unsettles people. They are used to your responses, your explanations, your endless availability. When that pattern breaks, they project discomfort onto you. They call it cold, distant, selfish. Let them speak, because now your silence speaks louder. It says you have nothing to prove. It says your peace is more valuable than the illusion of control. It says you are no longer willing to spend your energy explaining what your boundaries already make clear. This is where silence becomes a language, a form of presence so profound, it disrupts dynamics without a word. It reveals what words once concealed. It protects what noise used to expose. And the longer you practice this language, the more fluent you become in your own truth. You notice how much the world relies on reaction, how many conversations are fueled by insecurity, competition, and fear. You watch people perform instead of connect, argue instead of listen, react instead of reflect, and you begin to choose differently. You don't enter every debate. You don't correct every misconception. You don't explain every emotion. You let things be misunderstood, not out of apathy, but sovereignty. This is emotional maturity, the ability to let your silence carry the weight of your knowing. You realize how draining it was to constantly clarify your heart, how exhausting it was to seek approval through articulation, and how liberating it is to simply exist, unapologetically, unperformed, whole. People will still try to pull you back into the noise, into their narratives, into old versions of you that no longer exist. But now you see clearly. Reacting is not the same as responding, and responding is not always required. Silence is no longer your retreat. It is your stance. Silence, when rooted in clarity, becomes a filter. It sifts out what is noise and what is nourishment. You begin to hear the subtext in conversations, the unmet needs behind criticism, the insecurity behind aggression. and you no longer feel responsible for fixing what isn't yours. You realize that silence isn't empty, it's layered. It holds discernment, empathy, strength. And sometimes silence is the only honest response you have left. In that silence, you meet yourself in new ways. You listen not just to your thoughts, but to your nervous system. You notice what triggers contraction, what softens your breath, what restores your center. You realize peace isn't something you find outside, it's something you stop leaking. Every time you choose not to react, not to over-explain, not to engage where you are not met, you reclaim a piece of your presence. This is how silence teaches. This is how it reshapes your reality, not with loud declarations, but with steady absence. The absence of performance, the absence of approval-seeking, the absence of noise. And into that space flows truth. Quiet, complete, yours. Eventually, silence not only shapes how you relate to others, it reshapes how you relate to yourself. You begin to realize how often you interrupted your own truth for the sake of comfort. How many times you dismissed your instincts just to keep a moment smooth. How long you confuse stillness with weakness. But silence teaches you otherwise. It shows you that strength is not in how loud you speak, but in how deeply you know what does not need to be said. In your silence, you start witnessing your patterns. How often you volunteer to be the bridge, how much you sacrifice to keep the peace, how many wounds you absorbed just to hold a space that never held you back. And now, you choose not to anymore. Not with bitterness, not with blame, just with quiet, grounded clarity. You walk away not in anger, but in wholeness. You stay silent not out of pride, but out of peace. And in that shift, you reclaim your energy not as a defense, but as a devotion. Eventually, the world adjusts. The ones who only valued your noise disappear. The ones who needed your chaos fall away. What remains is rare, quiet, rooted, real. You no longer strive to be everywhere for everyone. You no longer fear being forgotten, because you have remembered yourself. This is the rebirth that silence offers. Not a performance of strength, but the real thing. Not a mask of independence, but the embodiment of self-trust. You speak when it matters. You rest when you need. You create from a place of fullness, not depletion. And you let others meet you where you truly are, or not at all. And as you move this way through life, you begin to understand. Silence was never the absence of power. There is a moment when you realize that boundaries are not walls, they are windows. Not fences to keep others out, but filters to protect what is sacred within. You don't set boundaries because you hate people. You set them because you finally love yourself enough to stop breaking. At first, it feels uncomfortable, especially if your identity was built around being agreeable, flexible, endlessly adaptable. Saying yes was easier than watching someone flinch at your no. But over time, something inside you shifted. You stopped interpreting discomfort as danger. You began to see that someone else's disappointment was not your failure. You started to say no, and the world didn't end. You stopped explaining yourself, and the truth remained intact. You set limits, and suddenly the weight you'd been carrying wasn't yours anymore. Boundaries are the beginning of self-respect. Not the loud kind, not the kind that demands recognition, the quiet kind, the kind that rearranges your life around peace instead of chaos. You begin to notice how your energy shifts when you say no from a place of clarity. Not because you're afraid, not because you're angry, but because you know what's right for you. There is power in that pause, the hesitation before saying yes, the breath before agreeing, the check-in with your body before replying. These are the new rituals of self-trust. People who once relied on your flexibility may resist. They may push back, guilt trip, or try to negotiate your no into a maybe. That's okay. Their discomfort is not your cue to soften. It's a reflection of a dynamic that's no longer being fed. And slowly your life begins to change. Not in grand, dramatic ways, but in the gentle quiet that comes when you no longer live on the edge of your own needs. This is the architecture of inner peace, one quiet no at a time. Eventually, you stop needing others to understand your boundaries in order to hold them. You realize that boundaries are not lines drawn in anger. They're lines drawn in awareness. They're not about keeping people out. They're about keeping your integrity in. You learn that a boundary is not a rejection of others. It's a reflection of your values, and those who genuinely respect you won't just tolerate your limits. They will honor them. Sometimes that means losing people, but more often it means finding out who was never really with you to begin with. Boundaries reveal truth, and truth, while sometimes painful, is always clarifying. With each line you draw, you stop leaking energy into places that were never meant to hold it. You stop bending to fit spaces that were never built to hold your truth. And you begin to stand, not harder, but softer, rooted, not rigid. This is where you begin to live in alignment. Boundaries are not the end of connection. They are the beginning of conscious relationship. When you honor your own limits, you also create space for others to do the same. No one has to guess, assume, or manipulate to be close to you. They simply have to meet you where you clearly stand. This clarity creates intimacy, not the kind born from enmeshment, but the kind born from mutual respect. You are no longer performing love. You are practicing it, anchored in honesty. And in this space, you begin to attract people who value what you protect, not just what you provide. People who are not threatened by your independence, but inspired by it. People who see your no as a sign of maturity, not rejection. You no longer chase validation through overextension. You find it in the quiet satisfaction of living in integrity with yourself. This is how boundaries build you, not by keeping people out, but by drawing you back to who you were before you believed love meant losing yourself. Eventually, boundary work becomes second nature. You no longer dread difficult conversations because you don't fear being misunderstood. You don't need to defend your limits. They are self-evident in the way you carry yourself. Your life begins to reflect your inner values, not just inherited roles. You show up more clearly. You give with more joy. You rest without guilt. You stop negotiating with your own needs just to avoid temporary discomfort. And in this space of radical honesty, your presence becomes stronger, not louder, just unmistakably grounded. People feel it. You feel it. You've stopped trying to earn your place in the world. You've started living from a place that knows you belong. That's the gift of real boundaries. They don't just protect you. They reveal you. Peace is beautiful, but peace is not free. No one tells you that when you begin choosing calm over chaos, you will lose more than noise. You will lose familiarity. You will lose the roles you once played. You will lose people who only knew how to find you in your urgency. And yet, there comes a moment when the cost of being constantly available, constantly accommodating, becomes too high. Your nervous system aches for relief. Your spirit no longer fits inside the version of you that was always reachable, so you begin to step away, gently, quietly. Not to punish, not to provoke, but to preserve. At first you feel guilty, as if reclaiming your time and your energy is selfish, as if choosing silence is a betrayal. But over time you begin to feel something else. Space. Not emptiness, not isolation. Just room. Room to breathe, to think, to feel without filtering. to listen to your own inner rhythm without having to harmonize with everyone else's. This is the beginning of peace. And peace, like all beautiful things, comes at a cost. You start to realize that peace often looks like distance, like unanswered messages, like missed calls, like fewer invitations. Not because you don't care, but because you care differently now. You care inward. You tend to the inner fire before lighting lanterns for others. This confuses people. They don't understand that your quiet is not neglect. It's maintenance. It's healing. It's choosing to no longer abandon yourself just to stay connected. And some people will leave, not with malice, but with misalignment. They were drawn to your chaos, not your calm. They fed off your reactivity, not your restraint. And now that you are no longer available in the way they remember, they look elsewhere. Let them. This is not loss. This is making room. For those who meet you in your stillness, for those who respect the sound of your boundaries, for those who don't need you to be frantic to feel close. Peace is not found in the absence of people. It is found in the presence of truth. And truth, once you begin living in it, asks you to stop apologizing for how you choose to protect your soul. Eventually, peace becomes your baseline, not the kind that avoids discomfort, but the kind that makes space for realness. You no longer rush to explain your silence. You no longer apologize for needing time. You let your calm speak for you. You start to notice how much energy you used to spend managing others' expectations, how often you confused urgency with importance, how many of your responses were rooted in fear of being misunderstood. Now, you pause, you assess, you decide, not from a place of defense, but from sovereignty. And the world begins to respond, not with fanfare, but with shift. The right people lean in, the wrong ones fall away. The noise begins to fade. You learn that peace is not something you find, it is something you protect, over and over again. Not just once, but every time you are tempted to betray your own stillness for temporary approval. This is how peace costs you and how it frees you. Peace is not passive, it is fiercely alive. It requires you to stand quietly in places where you once performed, to hold presence where you used to overextend, to listen without rushing to fill the silence. It teaches you patience. It invites you into moments that are unpolished and slow. It asks you to witness your discomfort without trying to control it. And in that stillness, you find a different kind of strength, the kind that does not demand but endures. You realize that peace is not the absence of noise. It is the presence of alignment, a deep knowing that your energy is now directed, not dispersed. And when people ask what changed, you will not need to explain. Your life will answer for you. Your peace will speak for itself. This is the price. This is the gift. This is the path you choose again and again. The cost of peace is real, but so is the freedom. There comes a moment when peace stops feeling like something you chase and starts feeling like something you become. You are no longer seeking rest. You are resting in your own presence. This stillness is different from silence. It is not just the absence of noise. It is the quiet knowing beneath it, the soft weight of self-trust, the grounded certainty that you no longer need to earn your worth with effort, reaction, or performance. It doesn't arrive all at once. It builds, moment by moment, boundary by boundary, breath by breath. And before you realize it, you are no longer reaching for peace. You are living from it. The world around you may still spin, demands may still echo, people may still try to tug you back into the chaos, but something inside remains unmoved. A quiet anchor, a steady core. This is what happens when you stop abandoning yourself. You begin to trust your pauses more than your plans. You learn to sit with questions instead of racing toward answers. You understand that not everything needs a response, that not every conflict requires your involvement, that your presence doesn't have to mean participation. Stillness teaches you discernment. It gives you space to choose your next move, not out of fear or urgency, but from intention, from alignment, from quiet strength. In this space, you begin to witness how much you've grown, not by how loud your boundaries are, but by how gently you hold them, not by how much you explain, but by how little you need to. You notice how deeply your body sighs when it realizes it is safe. Safe, not because the world has changed, but because you have. You are no longer pulling yourself in every direction just to be enough. You are enough where you stand. This stillness is not the end of the journey. It is the ground you now walk on. Stillness changes your relationships. You no longer seek closeness through chaos. You no longer confuse intensity for intimacy. You begin to notice which connections feel like home and which ones feel like performance. Some people will not understand this version of you. They will try to stir what you have settled. They will try to awaken the parts of you that used to overgive, overextend, overexplain. But you've come too far. You no longer respond to every invitation into urgency. You no longer participate in dynamics that drain you. You hold yourself in your own center, knowing that those who can meet you here are the ones who are meant to. This is not coldness. This is clarity. It is choosing depth over noise, substance over reaction, peace over pleasing. And in that choice you begin to feel held, not by others, but by your own presence, your own truth, your own stillness. Eventually, stillness becomes your compass. You check in with it before decisions. You return to it after disruption. It becomes your home, not your hiding place. And in that home, you realize how deeply you belong to yourself. You stop fearing solitude. You stop fearing slowness. You embrace the rhythm of a life that no longer performs urgency for connection. You rest in the truth that what is meant for you will not require you to abandon yourself to keep it. This is how stillness holds you, not by removing the noise from the world, but by removing the world's power to shake what is settled within. This is how you live now. There is a moment, quiet and almost unnoticed, when you realize you are no longer seeking to become someone else. You are no longer striving to be more, to be different, to be acceptable. You are simply being, and that is enough. This is the return, not to who you were before the world asked you to perform, not to the mask you wore to feel safe, but to the self that has been here all along, underneath the noise, behind the defenses, beyond the roles. You do not arrive in a flash of triumph. You arrive slowly, like morning light creeping through a half-open curtain. You feel it in small ways, the sigh of your shoulders when no one is watching, the steadiness in your breath when you tell the truth, the quiet joy of doing nothing and needing no justification. This return is not dramatic. It is sacred. It is intimate. It happens in silence, in solitude, in softness. It asks for presence, not performance. You begin to live without apology, not because you have hardened, but because you have softened into truth. You realize that your sensitivity is not a weakness. Your quiet is not a lack. Your depth is not too much. These are the parts of you that were never broken, only buried. In returning to yourself, you reclaim your rhythm. You no longer rush what needs time. You no longer chase what resists. You walk away not to escape, but to honor your own direction. And you start to feel the difference. The way your body no longer braces for rejection. The way your mind no longer scrambles for approval. The the way your spirit no longer shrinks to be palatable. You are no longer at war with yourself. That is the quiet miracle. You realize now that becoming yourself was never about adding more. It was about peeling back what never belonged to you. The expectations, the obligations, the stories that taught you you were too much or not enough. As they fall away, you begin to hear your own voice again, not the one shaped by fear or comparison, but the one rooted in knowing. It speaks in gentle affirmations, in gut feelings, in the calm clarity of what feels right, and in listening, you begin to trust yourself in ways you never have before. You stop outsourcing your decisions. You stop questioning your worth. You stop needing others to validate what you now know for yourself. This is not the end. It is the beginning. The beginning of a life lived from wholeness, not hunger, from truth, not performance, from freedom, not fear. And now, with each step forward, you carry yourself differently, not with pride, but with presence. Not to be seen, but because you see. You see the road you have walked. You see the strength it took to return. And you see finally that you were never lost, only layered. You meet the world not as a performance, but as a whole person, rooted, reclaimed, real. You speak less, but mean more. You give less, but offer everything. You need less, but feel fuller. This is the return to self, not an ending, not a destination, but a homecoming, one you carry within you always.